Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. As a Silicon Valley-based psychologist, I frequently hear from my clients about their work woes. These woes are often the result of companies who erroneously subscribe to harsh techniques in trying to bring out the best in their employees, which is kind of in line with the cliche, the beatings will continue until morale is increased. Not surprisingly, that doesn't work. Harsh practices may yield short-term benefits, yet creating positive workspaces appears to improve virtually all measures of long-term results. And while some people may lionize harsh practices or consider positive practices to be fuzzy, the science doesn't lie. Implementing positive work practices is good business. Thankfully, many companies are taking note of this fact to the benefit of all stakeholders, including at least two major high-tech companies where I've served as a resiliency consultant. And that is why I'm so excited to share with you my interview with this wonderful guest. Dr. Emma Seppala is a professor at Yale School of Management. She also serves as the science director at Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research Education. And she is the author of a book I absolutely adored called The Happiness Track. I am not alone in my appreciation of Emma and her work. I wholly agree with Susan Cain, the author of Quiet, who said Emma's work not only teaches us how to thrive in our chosen profession, but how to stay true to ourselves. So listen in as Emma and I geek out to the research about what really makes us thrive at work. Dr. Emma Seppala, who has asked me to call her Emma, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And I came across you by happenstance. As I mentioned, I was reading an article from Harvard Business Review that you'd written for proof that positive cultures are more productive. And it made me feel so vindicated in so many ways, because this is one of the things that I care about. This is one of the things I do with corporations. And to see an academic like you who was really giving a compelling case for why positive cultures actually are conducive to better business. I was wondering if you could just give us a little background before we even get into the research and all the geeky stuff that you and I will be attending to. How did you get into this?
Well, I think that we have all worked in workplaces that in some ways were problematic. Maybe they were downright toxic, or you were working for someone who was narcissistic or ultra anxious and stressed. Or perhaps you grew up or were in a work environment where you were told that your worth depends on your productivity. Any of these things can lead to sort of a downward spiral of burnout, of unhappiness, and therefore lack of productivity, which we know the research shows that when we are happier at work, when we have positive relationships with other people, when we're inspired, when there are strong values in a workplace like humility and kindness and compassion, we become more productive. In fact, super productive. That is what the research shows. And yet somehow many people don't know this. And the old school ways of managing don't necessarily create the circumstances to create this. And so we wanted to write down the data. And that article is a short summary of a lot of the data about this phenomenon. And we've actually recently published another article for HBR. Sorry, I'm forgetting what the title is, but it's about positive energy and how the best leaders have this contagious positive energy.
Contagious positive energy.
And that can sound so fluffy, but it's actually, again, co-written with Kim Cameron, who has actually conducted a lot of the research on this and showing that when you look at organizations in terms of sort of large networks, there are these nodes that are super productive. And when you look deeper into like what has created that productivity, you see that at the center of that is usually one person. And that is a person who is the de facto leader in the sense that they influence everyone else in a positive way because they interact with others with strong values like kindness, empathy, humility, forgiveness, and so forth. And as a consequence, they create this extremely positive atmosphere around them. That ironically leads to this sort of extreme productivity as compared to others. Now, if you think about the fact that the American workforce is 75% is disengaged at work, and of which 25% are actively disengaged, which means they're not just looking for another job, but they are working against their company, then we've got a lot to learn about how we can turn the workplace around and create more positive energy everywhere. So actually, this latest article that we wrote, I think was one of the most read. And the proof that positive workplace is more productive is constantly being reposted. And I know reread, and it's so relevant now, even though we wrote it 7 years ago.
Yep.
But this latest one was also extremely widely shared.
Amazing. Yeah. And I only came across it recently. So I'm glad to see that people are keeping that message alive, even though it has been written 7 years ago. You dropped so many bombshells in this one soundbite. But it seems almost as if at times we have a cognitive bias through which we will see something that appears fluffy or fuzzy and kind of dismiss it when in fact it's so entirely relevant. And later on, of course, corroborated by functional MRIs and a host of other objective measures. And all we need to do is sit with somebody who's just a complete downer, and we notice that our moods go down. And that's real. We don't need to gaslight ourselves and say that's not a thing. Moods are contagious. And I've definitely believed that enthusiasm is contagious, and a host of other positive traits in the workplace. We definitely feel the ripple effects of our leadership. So I'm so glad you said that. The thing that I need to highlight is you said that 75% of the workforce is comprised of people who are disengaged, 25% of whom are actively disengaged and perhaps even working against the company itself. Can you expand on that and perhaps even lay out, if you had just kind of a first line of defense for prevention and perhaps treating the issue itself? What are your thoughts on that?
Couple of things. I mean, what we're doing is not working. It's just so obvious, right? So there's a couple of things that work. One is this sort of old school way of leading. So sort of top-down managerial approach, which I think is slowly eroding now, but it's very hierarchical. That's sort of focused on transaction between people rather than interaction. This idea, you got to leave your emotions at the door and just come in and just do the work, rather than understanding that as human beings, the needs that we have as humans are still there when we're in a workplace. For example, our greatest need after food and shelter is positive social connection, so positive relationships with others. And that is also true in a workplace. For example, your heart health is directly correlated with your relationship with your boss. So if your boss is a tyrant, you're more likely to have high blood pressure, risk of heart attack, and so forth. So, and that's been shown in multiple studies. So just because you're at work and it's your boss and not like your brother or lover or whatever, you are just as impacted by that relationship as you are by your personal relationship. Just to show that when we walk into the workplace, we have the same needs to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be respected, to be cared for as well, to be cared for. And why should we not care for the people that work for us, right? So, but it's different perspective than that sort of old school way of dealing with things when things were really quite harsh. My father's a lawyer who sort of began his legal career in New York City about 55, 60 years ago. I mean, it was commonplace it was an abusive environment, and that was the norm. There was people committing suicide because of just how hard it was. And this was considered normal. Okay, so this was just 55, 60 years ago. I mean, we know even later in the 80s, women were getting totally harassed, sexually harassed at work and so forth. Still now, but I mean, then it was common and it was no big deal. That's just what happens, right?
Yeah. Price of doing business.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So if you speak to women leaders who were on Wall Street in the 80s, like Lynn Tilton, the CEO of Patriarch Partners, she said she owns the largest women-owned business in America, and she was totally sexually harassed at the time. But anyway, these things were considered normal. But nowadays, I mean, if you look at it, that's not what leads to human flourishing at work. And you can treat people that way if you don't care about turnover. For example, in the military, you're going to get a fresh crop of 18-year-olds in, and they're probably going to leave after 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 7 years. Many of them are not going to be lifetime in the military. And it doesn't matter. They are abused. The abuse is there. That's for sure. It's part of the training. They don't care because they're going to have turnover, and that's just part of the culture. But if you want to maintain people over time, you need to build those relationships. You need to make people feel safe. You need to make people feel valued. And as you do that, they flourish. As you do that, your business flourishes. And that's what the data shows, is that those businesses that are doing the best right now are the ones where people are treated in such a way. And as a consequence, you have better shareholder returns, greater productivity, greater customer service, greater everything, greater creativity. If you ask CEOs across countries, what's the number one thing you look for in incoming employees, they'll say creativity. I mean, it doesn't, above integrity, above intelligence.
That is actually number one, above integrity and intelligence.
Well, of course, because if you can't innovate, it doesn't matter how smart you are, right? It doesn't matter because you're not going to beat the competition if you can't make a better product.
Right. 100% agreed. Got it.
So let's think about that very critical sort of skill. When do you come up with your best ideas, Adam?
Probably after a workout, actually kind of consistent with Scott Barry Kaufman's description of like the shower research from the shower company. I think it's forgetting Grohe. Shower is probably my spot.
Yeah.
After a workout.
Right. It's when the brain is in the alpha wave mode, when it's most relaxed. So people will often say shower. They'll say taking a walk right before going to sleep, or right as I'm waking up, or as I'm driving. All of these activities that are sort of calm and not focused. You're not actually focusing on something. And that's when your brain's most likely to come up with aha solutions. And so what we're thinking about, I'm not saying, okay, go to work and not be focused, but if you are stressed at work, you are not going to innovate. When you're sitting and stressed and sweating at your computer, anxious about something, it's not when you come up with a aha solution. Sure, it can help to have a deadline, like, hey, you got to create this creative product by 3 days from now. It's good to have a frame and a deadline. Yes, it's helpful, but your greatest idea is probably going to come to you in the shower, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, so what we're doing by creating these sort of stressful environments, especially, for example, in Silicon Valley where you work, you're kind of blocking people's creativity. So that's an interesting thing that I don't think people have really thought about. Although, putting ping pong tables at the workplace and whatever other fun sort of games and whatever. Yes, it's fine. But if you're stressing people out like crazy the rest of the time, I don't know if it's going to really work out for you. But here's another thing that's hampering sort of the US workplace productivity and engagement, is that there's a belief that in order to get things done, you need to burn yourself into the ground. You need to burn the candle at both ends. You need to sacrifice your health, really. And that's sort of a norm. I've seen it everywhere. I was on the Yale campus as an undergrad, on the Stanford campus as a graduate student, and then working at Stanford, and then working in Silicon Valley, and just working in New York City. And it's the norm. It's a belief. It's a concept, and it's a destructive concept. And the reason I wrote The Happiness Track, my book, is because I saw just how it flies in the face of research on what leads to the greatest potential a human can achieve. And it is not by doing that, because sure, you might get some results for 10 years. You might get some results for 20 years, but eventually you're going to pay the price with your mental health, your physical health, with your relationships, even with your relationship to work when you're burnt out. And so the question is, what can we do better? And that's why I wrote that book, because I was at Stanford as a grad student in my first year. And I was like, whoa, I'm in flip-flops all the time. The sun is always shining. I'm driving my bike down Palm Drive with palm trees on either side. These incredible scholars. And there are 3 suicides on campus that first year.
Right.
You just think, what's going on here? We're in paradise, but many people are in hell. And they're in hell because I'm assuming many of them have succumbed to this idea that I am what I do. And if I fail, the whole world crumbles. And I would see it again and again in the people around me. And it just broke my heart, really. So when you ask, sometimes people are like, oh, my kid got into Yale, or like, great. And I want to teach them like, oh my gosh, you're not what you do. Don't believe the culture. Don't believe the environment. Don't believe the faculty that have bought into the same thing. Who are like the cream of the crop? Mm-hmm. Students who are the cream of the crop, academic faculty who are the cream of the crop, CEOs even, not all of them, many of them, overachievers. And so what I've come to see, if I can veer into this topic, is that they are often so intent on proving their significance. And yet no amount of adulation, no amount of success, none of money will up for the hole in your heart that comes from a lack of friendship from your own self.
Yeah.
Because you'll forever be heartbroken. And because you have sacrificed yourself, gone against any form of respect for your own self. And that harshness towards oneself that is often there, it carries forth on the harshness on others, impacting relationships. So I could go into depth about this, but this sounds a little negative, but it's something I've observed and I say, gosh, there's a different way. And that's why I wrote the happiness track, because if you want to be more creative, you need to spend more time taking time off, the time off that is due to you, because that's when your brain is actually in active problem solving mode. So what's the problem here?
Totally.
Well, Americans, coming from France where you have 2 months off in the summer, plus every Catholic vacation, plus all the strikes that are always there going on. And you come to the US and it's like, okay, you've got 10 days of vacation. Why aren't you taking them? Most Americans aren't taking the 10 days.
I want to go there for a second, because they may take those 10 days and they may invest their time unwisely. They may engage in what I call non-rejuvenating rabbit holes, whereby they're streaming something and responding something on their text. And you've actually talked about some research that indicates that when we engage in those types of activities, not only are they non-rejuvenating, they actually require the same amount of attention as if we were at work still. So it's not just the quantity of time that, for example, the French people have, it's our conscious attention to what we're doing during that time off, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. You're right. And you're right, because having grown up at least in Paris, it was like this. There's a lot of negativity in France. And so a lot of the time the French have everything. They've got free healthcare, free education. They're working 30 hours a week or less. They've got all this vacation, and yet they're very negative. So when you're very negative, it's like, I'm always like, the only thing the French are missing is gratitude, because if they had gratitude, they would be so freaking happy. But anyway, so back to the US. Yes. Okay. You only got 10 days. That's fine. Make the best of it.
Totally.
You only have an hour at night before you go to sleep. That's all you have because you're working so hard. You're working 2 jobs or whatever. Make the best of it. Yes. Don't be scrolling through your phone. Unless you have to check your text or whatever, but don't be losing yourself on a doom scroll when you could be doing something that does regenerate you. For example, meditating. For example, calling your aunt or whoever you love, going outside for that much needed walk, connecting with nature, whatever it is, that would be so much more useful. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't have time. And how much time do you spend wasting every day?
Right.
Just wasting time. So yeah, good point.
And I want to address something that you talked about. Here you are biking down Palm Drive in Stanford, and you are recognizing with tremendous gratitude how great it is to be in the warm weather, to be in your body as you're biking. And meanwhile, there are other students who've bought onto this kind of binary thinking of either I'm a success or I'm a failure. By the way, folks, spoiler alert, the end of which generally tends to be a fairly anticlimactic hollow victory, even if they do succeed, because you never get there. It's just a treadmill from hell. But that's how that story goes. I've interviewed scores of extremely successful people with all of the toys, and they all tell me the same thing, that without these tools that Emma is describing, these victories are completely hollow and meaningless. But to that point, that kind of rigid mindset, you talk a bit about Carol Dweck, who you and I both really love for research, the rigid mindset or the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And the people who are stuck in this fixed mindset, I'm either a success or I'm a failure, this binary, are also probably getting the red herring that either I'm working really hard and that's why they call it work and I must work to succeed, versus I'm willing to recreate through recreation. And you actually cite the importance, if this is a yes and proposition, not a no but proposition, whereby we are able to truly recreate as we engage in recreation, that it is actually contributes to neurogenesis. In other words, the creation of new brain cells. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back on this one time when I met another grad student in my field, one of my classmates at Stanford, and I said, aren't we so lucky? Isn't this amazing here? And he turned to me and said, what are you on?
Oh my God, really?
I was like, what are you not?
Dude.
What are you not seeing? And so, yes, it really takes a little bit of training, but really just takes awareness. Just take a few steps back, look around. What is your life? Did you have some meals today? Did you sleep on a bed? Are you able to, listen to this podcast? You got more going for you than most people on the planet. And sometimes we just need a reality check. But when we stay zoned in on these false beliefs, it's easy to stay in that rigid mindset and that fixed mindset in that small mindset, that small little world. And just stepping back and just realizing And sometimes it takes an illness. Sometimes it takes a death in the family. Sometimes it takes spending some time in the developing world to just be like, oh my God, life is, as cliche as it sounds, life really is moving fast and is short. And I am so freaking lucky that I'm living it. When I lived in China for a couple of years, every time I would come back, I would feel like I'm on a different planet. I would really realize like, oh my gosh, like when I'm sitting in the car driving from the airport, the road is smooth. I can drink water from the faucets without getting sick. There's heating in the winter, like different things that we don't even realize how lucky we are, right? So anyway, in terms of sort of moving into sort of a growth mindset, which I think so many people have talked about at this point, I don't even know if it's certainly not novel of a concept, but I don't know how many people are applying it. When you asked that question, I was thinking, growth mindset's like everybody's written about in their books at this point. It's such a well-known concept. And yet who's applying it if we're still buying into these beliefs, that I am what I do. I can do this. I cannot do that. I'm raising 2 little boys and we try really hard not to say, hey, you're really smart. You're trying really hard. Mm-hmm. We're always trying to use those words, but it's so easy to see how even 4 or 7-year-olds can slip into that. Well, my son has something with his eyes, so certain things he can't see properly or sort of process properly. And then he'll say, oh, I can't. I don't want to do that workbook because I have to do all that writing. And so it's very much within our culture, within our language, and we have to be careful.
You're speaking to something that I talk about a lot, and that is there's often a chasm between what we know and what we do. The application of this knowledge is in the simple acts of our language. And it's one thing to know about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. It's another thing entirely to make it part of your daily vocabulary to create an insurance policy that your children will not carry on the legacy of a fixed mindset.
Absolutely. So I would think, what do we do as adults to try and sort of get out of that? One thing is meditation. Meditation disentangles the thoughts, disentangles the concept, and not just meditation once, meditation every day, twice a day, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be so long. Different types of meditation I can talk about later if it's interesting too, but over 20 years, it's been a daily and it's still disentangling, gaining distance from some concepts that could have governed, your mind. So that's one thing. But the other thing is pushing yourself to do something that you wouldn't usually do. I was so shy in college that I would get lower grades because I couldn't get myself to communicate even in the small seminar groups. And I never, ever would have thought that I would be a public speaker as a career. And yet what happened was that someone, mentor of mine, said, go teach. You need to teach. And I was like, okay. He said, your gift is teaching. And I thought, what's he talking about? Like, me? I don't like to open my mouth. And here I am, right? I just would say, sometimes pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and outside your boundary, not always and not
of course
constantly, but just to realize, oh, right, like I can do this, those kind of things.
And to your point, again, this is a yes and proposition. This is not just at the exclusion of using your strengths and cultivating those, but it's also increasing our flexibility. And it calls to mind one of the most delightful things I've heard this year. And I work with a team of security professionals, online security professionals, and we were talking about building resilience through having a theme at the beginning of the new year. And one of the people said, my theme this year is addressing I'm not the kind of person who blanks. I'm not the kind of person who, for example, walks a different route to work. And so she walks a different route to work, for example, or who tries to take pleasure in something that had been previously maybe neutral to even mildly aversive. That would not be, of course, harmful, but something that would actually be good for her health over time. So I just think that you're speaking to that idea of like, I'm not the kind of person who teaches, and here you are teaching now. And I remember I grew up with the self-concept that I was not intelligent. I had a learning disability. I had no idea. I actually thought I was what they called back in my childhood mentally retarded, a term no longer used, but that was my belief about myself, that there was no way an original or intelligent thought could emerge from my mouth. Thankfully, we have new ways of learning, and my learning disabilities have been largely addressed. But boy, we really, to kind of use, maybe it's an apocryphal statement from Einstein, but something like, a fish who believes he should fly will consider himself an idiot for the rest of his life. And so many of us have gotten that erroneous message about who we are, who we're supposed to be, almost akin to that conversation you were having with that guy at Stanford, where you were trying to say, dude, wake up. We've got it pretty good over here. We can be so blind to what could be so incredibly obvious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, that being said, I'm imagining you Emma, going to a rather traditional company, trying to propose the integration of many of these research-backed ideas that somebody from the old guard could consider fluffy. How do you convince them that they should give it a try? How do you engage perhaps a rigid system to consider integrating something that will probably, in all likelihood, increase retention of employees, increase the amount of engagement, reduce the number of sick days, a host of positive outcomes that every company would give its right arm to achieve? How do you convince them, however, that these are things that should be part of a corporate culture?
Just data. That's it. That's what convinces. And that's what I've done. I remember going into one company and they were just, some of the people were probably forced to be in the room and they were just sort of laughing, like, why would we care about this topic? And it was an accounting company. And by the time, and I gave them an avalanche of data. By the time I left, they were like, oh my gosh, we get it now. We know why this is important. But data speaks mountains.
And what have been some compelling pieces of data that you've seen people's eyes light up around?
The article of proof that positive workplaces are more productive. I use a lot of that data. And
I highly recommend it, folks. If you can Google that with her name and an HBR, it's really
I just tell people to just send this around, send this to your leaders.
Send it to your leaders. So what have been some of the pieces of research that have really contributed to life hacks that you have integrated in your personal and work life that have given you a huge ROI?
My greatest ROI is from the meditation practices I do every day. There's no doubt about it. I don't have a lot of time. My kids get up at 5:30, so I have to do it. Meditation before they get up, or some squeeze it in before work after they're in school, and then after they go to bed. But they're everything because I feel like they give me the ability to be creative, to restore myself, to have a bigger, broader perspective. So easy day to day to just stay stuck in the loop of what's going on and the little stories and the little stressors or the big stressors and the news and whatever else, is flying around in your face. And these days, more and more intense sort of ways, last couple of years and still. And the only way to sort of have sovereignty is to be able to still your own mind and reconnect with your own self as opposed to everything else that everyone is showering us with. And I really feel, especially in the last couple of years, the pandemic and post-pandemic and all the crazy stuff happening right now, that's it. If you're able to be at peace within yourself, that is when you're going to be at your most powerful.
That's beautiful. And many of my listeners will probably be thinking, well, I've tried meditation. It wasn't for me, or I'm not the kind of person who can still my mind. I'm not good at it because I have a monkey mind and I'm not good at it. And I don't like being not good at it. And I'm putting quotes around I'm not good at it because, as you and I both know, there's no such thing as being, quote, good at it or not. or I don't have the time for that. Like, what would be your thoughts? How would you maybe gently get somebody to maybe Sam I am it vis-a-vis green eggs and ham? If you're familiar with the book, how might they be able to get a good sample of doing it?
There's no such thing as one type of meditation. You have to find the shoe that fits. Okay. So for me, I remember after 9/11, I was in New York. I saw the second plane hit. It was during 9/11. I was very anxious after that.
As one would be.
You know what? I was trying mindfulness at the time. It was just sort of newish at the time. New, I mean, in terms of it wasn't so popular as it is now. And it wasn't going to work for me. I was anxious. And when you told me to close your eyes and observe how you're feeling and your thoughts, that can actually be more anxiety provoking when you're already anxious. It wasn't working for me. Even though I tried so hard and I so wanted it to work. And I read every book by John Kabat-Zinn at the time. And so what ended up working for me was a breathing practice. And it's called sky breath meditation. And it was active breathing. And that so settled my nervous system, I was able to bounce back and really, really do very well after that in terms of everything, my whole career. It's interesting because part of my research trajectory 10 years later led me to doing research with veterans with trauma coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of the therapeutic and pharmaceutical therapies were not working, we knew from research, or they didn't want to do them because they didn't like them. And so we thought, let's see if this can help them, because I had that insight, given that how much it helped me with my anxiety. And post-traumatic trauma is your nervous system is in a constant state of fight or flight, as if you're constantly in danger, right? So they couldn't sleep, they couldn't work, their relationships were a mess, they were living in their basement, bunkered up, drinking or smoking weed or whatever. Anyways, we ran that study looking at the sky breath meditation for them as compared to a control group that didn't. And in 1 week, most of them no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress. Now, these were people who've had it for a long time.
My God.
1 month and 1 year later, the results were maintained, which is something we don't usually see. and research. I mean, none of us expected this. It was a very strong finding. And fast forward a couple years ago, I'm back at Yale as a research scientist, and I was invited to come and lead a study on well-being for Yale undergraduates. And again, we had the opportunity to test different modalities. So we had some of the students go through a mindfulness-based stress reduction modality. A group of students go through the sky breath meditation, and one group of students go through an emotional intelligence curriculum that our center had designed, and one just a control group. And again, what we saw is the group that had the most effects, the most benefits when compared to the control group was the sky breath meditation. And when we think about why that could be, it's like the breathing sort of conditions your nervous system to a place of calm. So, mindfulness techniques and sort of emotional intelligence techniques of just sort of changing how you think or observing anything, they can have their own benefit for sure. But it looks like what the breathing practices are doing is that they're conditioning your nervous system back. It's like a reset. So many of us are trained to be stressed. We are good at being stressed. Our nervous system will go there very fast. Almost everyone, I would say, almost everyone. Where we also kind of worship at the temple of stress sometimes because so many people believe they have to.
It becomes almost a prideful thing.
Right. And so anyway, a lot of people believe that's the only way they're going to be productive again, back to our earlier conversation.
Right.
Yeah. What we know is it just leads to burnout. It does lead to anxiety and eventually can also lead to depression because you're so fatigued from it, right? So anyway, so that's what we think sort of from a scientific perspective is that the active breathing, it's not just observing breath, but this active breathing and the pattern in which it happens in the sky breath meditation, it has sort of a reconditioning effect. So it puts you in parasympathetic mode as opposed to the sympathetic. So in rest and digest rather than fight or flight. So that sort of got me, all of these studies have just sort of reaffirmed my own experience. So I have that practice and then I do in addition, that takes about 20 minutes. And then in addition, I do a meditation practice for 20 minutes in the morning and then in the evening. So that's about 40 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. So it's about an hour, but and a lot of people be like, well, I have no time. And what do you have time for? Are you watching Netflix? What is that doing for you? Is that helping you every day? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Great. But I guarantee you that most people engage in certain things that are not benefiting them. You're just sitting on the couch and drinking, or are you just, whatever it is that you're doing? How many people do that? How many people?
For sure. You're welcome to use my term, non-rejuvenating rabbit holes.
Yeah, we're on the same page. So you know what I'm talking about.
But as long as, of course, you must cite the originator of the term. No. But I've got to know, I think all the listeners probably are wondering, what is sky breath? I've never heard of it.
Yes. Well, it's a technique that comes from India. So from the yoga tradition, it was at first taught by Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar in India, I guess like 40, 50 years ago. And then he started a nonprofit called Art of Living. And that is a nonprofit that teaches this technique. You can learn it over a weekend on Zoom.
Do TM. I love it, quite frankly. Great. But this sounds incredible. I'm a huge fan, of course, of breathing techniques. I love Dr. Andrew Weil's 478. I love the 4-4-4-4-4 boxing. Yeah. And I've seen it work very well with my patients.
Very well.
One of his axioms is the answer is always just under your nose. And I love that idea of referring to breathing. But yeah, so this sounds like this is like a combination of breathing exercises and meditation.
Yeah, so I think of it as sort of a comprehensive set of breathing tools that when practiced together have this sort of very deep effect. So since you already do TM twice a day.
I don't do it twice a day. I've been somewhat of a lapsed.
It's a good practice to do right before, and then you'll see that you go right into meditation in a very deep manner. When you've completed it, you can do your TM practice right after. So I was at a research conference for meditation researchers called Mind and Life many years ago. And there was one of the Dalai Lama's translators was there, is the Geshe, who had been, he'd been a monk for like 30 years. And he really wanted to learn this breathing practice because I guess the Dalai Lama visits Sri Sri's ashram. And so when he can't visit the ashram, then he sends this Geshe. And the Geshe was like, oh, I really want to learn this practice. I feel like I really like how he liked people there at the ashram he went to. So anyway, he learned it. And I asked him, well, what do you think? And he said, well, it's really interesting. When we go to the deepest level of meditation, we call it clarity. And it takes a while to get there, at least 40 minutes or whatever. And he said, but the sky breath takes you right there. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Because I have no idea where I'm going when I'm practicing it. And most of us don't. But here's a monk who's like trained in consciousness and the awareness of the different levels of consciousness. And so it's interesting to hear him describe it.
Massive endorsement.
Yeah, not from a scientific perspective. Again, I don't know if we really truly understand how it all works.
I guess it's less important to know how it works and at least as important, maybe more important to know that it works and that you actually have quantifiable results to show that it may work well with people with potentially chronic PTSD, which is a very difficult condition to treat. And to think that sky breath can help
By the way, I wanted to say, if there's anyone who's a veteran or military who is listening, there is a nonprofit called Project Welcome Home Troops that teaches this at no cost to veterans and military and their family, which is cool.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. So what better way to thank our vets than to give them tools to heal in light of the suffering that they've encountered while giving so massively. Before we go, I wanted to ask about wearables. You actually talk a bit about the paradox of wearables, that they may in some ways incur stress. They may help us with getting some type of biofeedback, there may be a way to engage wearables more intelligently or to consider discarding them altogether, depending on what's going on. What are your thoughts on wearable devices that talk to us, like our Apple Watches and whatnot?
I think they can be good tools to educate you on patterns, on things that might be leading to stress or if you're not getting up and walking around enough. I think they're good education tools. They can be good education tools. I personally don't wear any, but my husband does wear the Oura Ring, and he feels like he's learned some good things about it.
Cool.
And what leads to good sleep, what doesn't lead to good sleep. So when he eats too late or whatever, he doesn't sleep as well, those kind of things. I think they're good education tools. They're not an end, but they're an assistant. Sure. They're not going to change your behavior, but they'll teach you about it.
Got it. And I guess one of my final questions is, how far, you talk about the ripple effects of happiness, how far can happiness spread unbeknownst to the practitioner of techniques to incur happiness to themselves? Let's talk about just kind of how the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon as it relates to happiness.
Well, I just think a lot of people feel like it's selfish to take care of yourself and spend all this time meditating, whatever. Like, that's just, why would you do that? That's so selfish and self-centered. And to that, really, I respond, your well-being impacts, and we know this from research by Nicholas Christakis' colleague, your well-being impacts 3 degrees around you. So if you're happier, your child's hairdresser's partner's happier, really has that impact. Emotions really are contagious. And happiness sounds like such a trite word, but I would probably say, mental well-being. I think, as you mentioned earlier, we all know how we feel when we're around someone stressed or negative, and how we feel afterward, drained and sort of down, as opposed to after being with someone uplifted who has learned to fill their own cup by taking care of themselves and taking care of others. So how I would summarize the field of happiness in one sentence. So for the last 20 years of looking at the field of happiness, I would summarize it like this, that the happiest people are the ones who live a life characterized by compassion for others, balanced with compassion for themselves.
And that was the word that came to my mind as well. You could even substitute happiness for just being compassionate with people and feeling the ripple effect. Like, wouldn't that be an amazing society? Which causes me to almost ask my final question. But before I ask my very final question, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet? Okay, you're shaking your head. So my final question, besides meditation, which you've described at length, if you could give, or if you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity one skill or insight that would be really helpful, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would impact the individuals as well as society at large?
Wisdom.
Talk about that.
We learn a lot of things, and we don't learn anything about becoming more wise. And who cares how successful you are, how much money you have, how beautiful you are, how whatever. If you are stuck in the small things of life, if you are negative, if you are unhappy, if you are, everybody goes through periods of unhappiness, but if you are just feeling so stuck in your life, who cares, right? And so wisdom is there. Wisdom has been there for our entire civilization. It has been in every country. There are volumes and volumes of texts from philosophical traditions, from religious traditions, from artistic traditions at our disposal. And yet we don't engage with them as much unless we're seeking them out. So that's my recommendation. You're going to find the one that speaks to you, whether it's, Rumi's poetry, or you're into Buddhist philosophy or Vedanta. There's so much out there, right? There's so much. So that would be my recommendation.
I'm also imagining that in addition to our RSS feeds and the doom scrolling that many of us do, which really occupy our brains, that you're speaking about old things that have lasted throughout time.
Yes. Honestly, all the information coming at us at such speed right now, it is preventing us from being in touch with our own selves. And it is preventing us from being in touch with our own innate wisdom that we do have access to when we silence our minds. And so I would say, have some better boundaries around what you're letting in, because you are what you eat. And that's not just for food. It's also for everything you ingest from around you. I personally have very strong boundaries with the news. I hardly am on social media at all. Yes, I post and the posts are from me, but I'm not engaging so much. And I definitely hardly scrolling. I have the sources of information where I go and look for information I want, but I want to engage with the world around me. I want to be present for my kids while they're small. I want to watch their smiles. I want to be with nature. We know that those are some things that bring us the greatest joy. Is people are never happiest and when they're in the present moment. That is what the research shows, even if you're doing something you don't like. And yet all of this stuff is taking us out of the present moment, which is robbing us of our own lives.
So great. I've felt that you were a sister from another mister from reading your book twice, actually listening to it on Audible. And I guess I was wrong. I'm going to ask one final question is, where would be some sources of wisdom if you were to just name a few that have been meaningful to you?
Well, because I've gotten really into sky breath meditation, I follow the wisdom of Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who has written a lot of books. And because they're written in our time, they really kind of speak to me because they are they're very relevant to modern times. I have his books always by my bedside looking, but I also like older, really ancient books. There's one called the Yoga Vasishta. It's this crazy, I got introduced to it in graduate school. It's this crazy book. The way I think about it is it deprograms your mind. It deprograms you from the small thinking because it just stretches your mind. But I also do love poetry. I do love Maya Angelou's poetry. And again, the poetry also, it stretches your mind. It opens your mind. It silences your mind. Anything that brings silence to your mind is wisdom worth reading. It gives you pause.
And I love that. You both read the original sources as well as the bridges between now and those old times. I will say straight up, just a shout out to Michael Meade, who is one of the great thinkers of our current time, who acts for me as a bridge between the ancient wisdom and today. And I really resonate with Rumi's poetry and a host of other things, including Alan Watts, who has been like, all you need to do is listen to one of his talks and just the brain is just different afterward in a very positive way.
Right.
Or the interview between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. So the interview between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell also just makes me feel more alive and connected to the world and the cosmos. Oh my gosh, Emma, I'm just so happy to meet with you. This has been long in the making and you delivered. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with my listeners.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.